I didn't raise my voice when my son-in-law told me to pack my things. I didn't cry when he handed my bedroom to his mother. I only went quiet, and that silence changed everything. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Collins and I was 55 years old when this happened. I live in Plano, Texas, a calm suburban town where people smile politely and believe family problems belong behind closed doors. I used to believe that too. I'm a widow. After my husband passed away, my world became smaller and much quieter. The house we built together felt too large, too empty. My daughter, Emily, told me I shouldn't live alone. She said it wasn't safe. She said I would always have a place with her. When her husband, Daniel, nodded and said, "Your family," I believed him. I moved into their home thinking it would be temporary, but also believing it would be safe. I wasn't desperate. I had my own savings. I had my dignity. I simply believed I was welcome. At first, I tried to be invisible in the best possible way. I woke up early before anyone else came downstairs. I cooked breakfast. I folded laundry. I helped with the grandchildren and kept my opinions to myself. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the one who oversteps or complains. I didn't want to be a problem. I helped where I could. When bills were tight, I quietly covered them. When the kids needed someone after school, I was there. I never asked for recognition. I never reminded anyone of what I gave. I believed love didn't need receipts. But slowly something shifted. Conversations began happening without me. Plans were made as if I wasn't sitting in the room. Daniel started referring to the house as ours when guests came over, never all of ours. When I spoke, my words were met with polite smiles and gentle dismissals. "That's old thinking," he'd say. Or, "Things are different now." I noticed every bit of it. I just didn't react. I've lived long enough to know that reacting too quickly gives other people control. So I stayed calm. I stayed observant. I told myself families go through phases and that patience is part of love. Then one afternoon, Daniel asked everyone to sit down. He didn't sound angry. He sounded ready. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. Before everything broke, my life moved to a steady, quiet rhythm. Nothing exciting. Nothing dramatic. Just steady. And after burying the person you thought you'd grow old with, that kind of steadiness matters more than people realize. Most mornings I woke up before the rest of the house. I liked the quiet before sunrise when the kitchen lights were still off and the world felt neutral, undecided. I made my coffee, stood by the window and watched the street wake up. Cars backed out of driveways. Sprinklers clicked on. Neighbors headed to work. It reminded me that life kept moving even when grief tried to slow you down. I filled my days by being useful. That's how I've always survived hard seasons. I cooked so Emily wouldn't have to rush in the evenings. I picked the kids up from school, helped them with homework, listened to their stories even when my body felt tired. I folded laundry, cleaned shared spaces, kept track of appointments when schedules got tangled. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't expect thanks. I just did what needed doing. Money became another quiet contribution. When bills piled up or something unexpected came up, I covered it without discussion. Utilities. Groceries. School supplies. I told myself it was temporary, that families lean on each other during tight times. I never kept score. But I did start noticing patterns. Decisions were being made without my input. Not big ones at first. Small shifts that were easy to overlook. A new couch ordered without asking whether it would block the hallway. The thermostat changed to a setting that left me cold. A family calendar updated with everyone's plans except mine. Daniel had a particular way of smiling when he dismissed me. "We've got it handled," he'd say even when I hadn't offered advice. Or, "That's not really how things work anymore," when I mentioned something practical. His tone was polite, but there was an edge of finality in it, like the conversation had already ended. I began hearing the phrase, "extra space," more often. Extra space in the garage. Extra space in the guest room. Extra space we might need soon. Each time something tightened quietly in my chest. I noticed it, but I didn't confront it. I told myself I was being sensitive. I reminded myself this wasn't entirely my house. I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to create tension where there didn't need to be any. Emily changed too, though in a softer way. She still hugged me. She still thanked me for helping with the kids. But she avoided deeper conversations. When I tried to explain that I felt unsettled, she reassured me quickly and then changed the subject. It was easier for her that way. From the outside, we probably looked like a functioning family. Dinners together. Birthday celebrations. Weekend routines. No shouting. No obvious conflict. But respect doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes quietly. I felt myself shrinking, not because anyone demanded it outright but because the space to exist comfortably was narrowing. My presence felt tolerated, not valued. Conditional. So I stayed calm. I told myself patience was strength. I told myself that if I remained kind and cooperative, things would settle. I didn't realize then that my silence was being mistaken for surrender. And while I was doing everything I could not to be a burden, someone else was already deciding where I belonged. The moment didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. There was no explosion. It came quietly, wrapped in calm voices and careful wording, which somehow made it harder to absorb. Daniel asked us to sit down one afternoon after lunch. He used that familiar tone people use when they believe they're being fair, measured, almost considerate. The children were in the living room, half listening while they played, close enough to sense something serious was happening. Emily stood near the kitchen counter, the same spot she always chose when she didn't want to take sides. Daniel cleared his throat and said he had something important to talk about. I remember the way he folded his hands, the way he leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked confident, comfortable, like someone who had already decided how this would end. He said his mother would be moving in with us. Permanently. I didn't interrupt him. I waited. I wanted to hear every word before I decided whether I would speak at all. He explained that his mother needed support. That she couldn't manage on her own anymore. That family had to step up. I agreed with that part. I even nodded. I've never believed in abandoning aging parents. Then he said it. Mom needs your room, he told me, using that easy, familiar word. You can move into the storage room for now. We'll make it work. For now. He said it lightly, as if the word itself could soften what he was taking. As if time would somehow make it reasonable. He gestured down the hallway, already imagining boxes being moved, decisions finalized. I looked at Emily. She didn't meet my eyes. Her lips pressed together for just a second before she looked away. That silence answered everything I hadn't yet asked. The children had stopped playing. They were watching now, not fully understanding but aware enough to feel the shift in the room. I felt a heat rise in my chest. Not anger. Something sharper. Humiliation. This wasn't a discussion. There were no options, no acknowledgement of my space, my routines, my dignity. I was being reassigned quietly and efficiently, like furniture that needed to be moved out of the way. I asked one question. Just one. How long? Daniel hesitated, not long enough to think of an answer, just long enough to show there wasn't one. We'll see how it goes, he said. That was when it became clear. This wasn't about his mother's needs. It was about priorities. And I was no longer one of them. No one defended me. No one said my name. No one questioned whether this was fair. Emily stayed silent. The room stayed still. Even the children stopped moving. I nodded once. Fully. Daniel smiled, visibly relieved. He thanked me for being understanding. He started talking about logistics, boxes, timing, arrangements, as if the hardest part were already over. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't list everything I had done for that family. I didn't need to. I was listening more closely than he realized. Because in that moment, sitting there being quietly displaced in front of my own grandchildren, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to belong. And when you stop trying to belong, you begin to see clearly who holds power, and who assumes you don't. That evening I packed my things slowly. Not because I had many but because I needed the time. Each item I folded or placed into a box carried a memory. Quiet mornings, phone calls with friends, the routines that had held me together since my husband's death. I moved carefully, deliberately. Rushing would have made it feel like I was being chased, and I refused to give it that power. Daniel didn't help. He stayed in the living room, scrolling on his phone, occasionally glancing down the hallway as if checking my progress. Emily brought me an empty box and said, "I'm sorry," without lifting her eyes. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but it stopped short of resistance. I thanked her anyway. Old habits are hard to break. The storage room was small and windowless. It smelled faintly of dust and old cardboard. When I turned on the light, a single overhead bulb flickered, then steadied. There was just enough space for a narrow mattress in my suitcase. No dresser. No place for photos. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a holding area. That night, I lay on the mattress listening to the sounds of the house I no longer belonged to. Daniel's mother arrived late. I heard the front door open, her voice bright and familiar, followed by Daniel's laughter, louder than I'd heard it in months. Suitcases rolled down the hallway, the same hallway I had just cleared for her. No one came to check on me. The next morning I woke early again. Habit doesn't break easily. I dressed quietly and made coffee, standing at the counter like a guest who wasn't sure of the rules. Daniel's mother sat at the table, sipping tea already settled. My old bedroom door was closed. I didn't ask to retrieve my things. I didn't knock. I noticed the way Daniel spoke to her, patient, attentive, eager to please. He explained schedules, asked for her preferences, adjusted plans around her comfort. He didn't do that with me anymore. Maybe he never had. Or maybe I just hadn't been ready to see it. Over the next few days, the house rearranged itself around the new order. My presence faded to the edges. Meals were planned without asking if I'd be home. The children stopped coming to my room at night to talk. Daniel referred to the storage room as your space now, as if it were an upgrade. I told myself to endure, to be gracious, to avoid conflict for Emily's sake. But endurance has limits, and dignity is one of them. I began to feel unsafe, not physically but emotionally. I didn't know how long this would last or what would be asked of me next. When someone takes your space without hesitation, they rarely stop there. At night, I sat on the edge of the mattress and asked myself questions I didn't want to answer. Was I being unreasonable? Was this simply what aging looked like? Being moved aside quietly, efficiently, without ceremony? Then I thought of the years I'd spent holding things together. The bills I'd paid without being asked. The childcare I'd provided without complaint. The support I'd given without conditions. None of it had earned me a voice. During those quiet hours, something became clear. Silence had protected me before. Now it was enabling them. I didn't know yet what I would do. I wasn't planning confrontation. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was reassessing where I stood. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt a familiar steadiness return. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. Something was wrong. And I wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. The breaking point didn't come from another argument. It came from a moment so ordinary that it stripped away every excuse I'd been holding on to. A few days later, Daniel called what he described as a family check-in. He said it casually, the same way someone might mention dinner plans. By then his mother had fully settled in. Her clothes filled the closet that once held mine. Her toiletries lined the bathroom counter. My world had been reduced to a narrow path, from the storage room to the kitchen and back again. We sat at the table. Daniel took the seat at the head, his mother beside him, settled and comfortable. Emily sat across from them. I took the last chair, slightly apart, my knees brushing against a stack of unopened mail. Daniel hadn't bothered to move. Daniel spoke first. He said the new arrangement was working well. He said his mother was comfortable. He said everyone was adjusting. Then he turned to me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask how I was coping. He simply told me what would happen next. He said the storage room was temporary, but that he needed flexibility. He said I should start looking for other options. He said it gently, with that same reasonable tone, as if he were doing me a kindness by giving me advance notice. I asked him if he meant that I should move out. He paused, then nodded. Eventually, yes. We just need the space. That word again. Space. I looked at Emily. She stared down at the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. She didn't argue. She didn't look surprised. That told me everything. This conversation had already happened, just not with me present. Daniel's mother spoke next. She said she appreciated my understanding. She said it was hard at her age to adjust, as if I were younger, more flexible, less in need of consideration. She smiled as she said it. Not cruelly. Confidently. That was the moment something settled inside me. I wasn't being pushed out because there wasn't room. I was being pushed out because I was inconvenient. Because my quiet presence disrupted the order Daniel wanted. One where his priorities came first and mine didn't exist at all. The children wandered into the room while the conversation continued. They stood in the doorway listening. Daniel didn't stop speaking. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't consider what they were absorbing in that moment. They were learning that it was acceptable to remove someone slowly and politely, without ever acknowledging the harm. No one defended me. No one asked if I was okay. No one questioned whether this was fair. The decision was treated as practical. Inevitable. I nodded again. Not because I agreed but because I understood. I understood that pleading would only confirm Daniel's belief that I was dependent. That anger would be stored and used against me later. That tears would be remembered but never respected. So I stayed calm. I thanked them for being honest. That surprised Daniel. He expected resistance. He expected emotion. He didn't expect composure. After the meeting ended, I went back to the storage room and sat on the mattress. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pack. I thought. I thought about everything I had given quietly. Everything I had documented without realizing it might one day matter. Everything I had assumed would protect me simply because it was right. And that's when something became clear. They believed I had no leverage. They believed I would leave quietly. They were wrong on both counts. That night the house felt unfamiliar. Not hostile, just indifferent. And indifference can be more unsettling than anger because it leaves no space to respond. I lay on the thin mattress in the storage room, staring at the ceiling, listening as footsteps passed my door without slowing. I felt stripped of something essential. Not just comfort but legitimacy. I was still there, still breathing the same air, still contributing where I could, yet I had been quietly reclassified as temporary. Disposable. A problem to be managed and eventually removed. Sleep came in fragments. Each time I drifted off, I woke with the same pressure in my chest, the same unanswered question lingering. How had this happened without anyone thinking to ask me? I replayed the scene at the table. Daniel's careful tone, his mother's calm confidence, Emily's silence. I searched for a moment where I might have changed the direction of things. I couldn't find one. By morning the isolation felt heavier. The kitchen buzzed with normal life. Coffee brewing, cabinets opening, the children arguing over cereal. I stood in the doorway for a second, unsure where I fit. When I stepped in, the conversation didn't pause. It moved around me, uninterrupted, as if I were invisible. I poured my coffee and leaned against the counter. No one asked how I slept. No one asked what my plans were. The house had learned how to function without acknowledging me. That feeling followed me through the day. While folding laundry, I noticed my clothes placed in a smaller pile, already separated. When I checked the mail, every envelope carried someone else's name. Even the refrigerator reflected the change. Labels replaced, shelves rearranged, preferences adjusted without a word to me. I told myself to stay steady. To breathe. To observe. Emotional reactions can be used as tools by people who want control. I wasn't going to give them that advantage. Still, there was a struggle I couldn't ignore. Part of me wanted to endure quietly, to leave without conflict, to protect my daughter from tension. I had spent a lifetime choosing peace over confrontation. That instinct was familiar, almost comforting. But another part of me, older, calmer, more certain, refused to disappear. Endurance, I realized, isn't the same as dignity. And silence isn't the same as consent. I thought about my grandchildren and what they were learning by watching me be sidelined without protest. I thought about Emily, about the cost of her quiet compliance. And I thought about Daniel. How confidently he spoke, how certain he was that this would end exactly the way he wanted. That certainty unsettled me. Not because it frightened me but because it showed he believed I had nothing left to stand on. The weight of isolation began to shift into something else. Not anger. Not bitterness. Resolve. The kind that forms slowly, privately, without announcement. I didn't pack my things that day. I didn't explain myself. I didn't ask for help. I kept my routines but with intention now. I started paying attention to details I'd once ignored. Dates, documents, conversations, patterns. By evening the truth was clear. If I stayed silent out of fear, I would leave as a ghost. If I chose to stand, carefully and deliberately, I might lose comfort but I would keep myself. And I was no longer willing to trade that away. I didn't wake up angry the next morning. I woke up focused. There's a difference. Anger burns quickly and makes noise. Focus sharpens quietly. It slows you down just enough to ask the right questions. While the house was still asleep, I sat at the small folding table in the storage room and opened a worn folder I'd carried with me for years. It wasn't labeled. Didn't need to be. Inside were papers I had never thought of as leverage, only as proof of a life lived responsibly. Bank statements, transfer receipts, notes written in my husband's careful handwriting. I had never planned to use them. I hadn't even thought of them as protection. They were simply records, evidence of contributions made quietly, consistently, without expectation of anything in return. Years earlier, when Emily and Daniel were struggling to buy their home, I had helped with the down payment. Not as a blind gift but as a safeguard. My husband had insisted on documentation. Not because we don't trust them, he told me at the time, but because love shouldn't erase clarity. Back then it felt unnecessary. Almost pessimistic. Now it felt essential. I spread the papers out slowly, reading them again with different eyes. The dates lined up. The amounts were clear. There were acknowledgments, short, informal but unmistakable. Emails confirming transfers. Text messages thanking us for making this possible. Nothing dramatic. Nothing exaggerated. Just facts, sitting patiently where they'd always been. Daniel didn't know about the folder. Emily might have forgotten it even existed. To them, my help had blended into the background, absorbed into the story they told themselves about independence and ownership. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. That day I went through my routine as usual. I cooked dinner. I helped with homework. I nodded politely when Daniel spoke to me about schedules and logistics, as if nothing had changed. He seemed relaxed. Even pleased. My lack of resistance reassured him. That worked in my favor. Later that evening I made a phone call from my car, the door closed, the engine off. I asked careful questions. About financial contributions. About occupancy rights. About what happens when someone is pressured to leave without formal notice. I listened more than I spoke. What I learned didn't promise instant resolution. It didn't offer revenge. It offered clarity. Options. Time. I began organizing quietly. Making copies. Writing down timelines. Recalling conversations I had brushed aside before. I didn't dramatize any of it. I documented it. Preparation isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It happens while others assume the story is already finished. That night, Daniel joked at dinner about finally having things settled. He smiled easily. His mother laughed. Emily smiled too, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I smiled back. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something they didn't. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They thought my age meant limitation. They thought this chapter would end quietly. They were wrong. I wasn't preparing to fight. I was preparing to stand, on facts, not emotion. And once you do that, the balance begins to shift, whether anyone notices it yet or not. The decision came quietly, without drama or ceremony. I didn't wake up one morning feeling brave. I woke up feeling finished. With confusion, with waiting, with hoping someone else would fix what they had broken. Daniel approached me after breakfast that day. His tone was polite, almost careful. He said he and Emily had been talking and thought it would be best if I started planning my transition. He chose that word deliberately, as if it softened what he was asking. "We think it's time you find another place," he said. "We don't want this to be stressful." I looked at him and understood something immediately. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't defensive. He believed the decision had already been made. He believed I would nod again, pack again, and disappear quietly. Something in me settled too, but in a different way. I told him I understood. I said I appreciated the honesty. I told him I would take care of it. That caught him off guard. I saw it in his face. He had expected questions. Negotiation. Emotion. Instead he was met with calm agreement. That afternoon I went out alone. I drove past familiar streets, past places my husband and I used to visit, letting the quiet of the car settle my thoughts. I parked in front of a small office building I had already researched, walked inside and asked to speak with someone who could explain my options clearly. I didn't complain. I didn't accuse. I laid out facts. Timelines. Contributions. Documents. Then I asked one question, the only one that mattered. What are my rights? The answer wasn't dramatic. It was steady. Grounded. It gave shape to the uncertainty I'd been carrying. It didn't promise immediate relief, but it confirmed something essential. I wasn't powerless. I had standing. I had choices. For the first time since Daniel told me to pack my things, I felt my spine straighten. Not out of anger, but alignment. Everything I had endured suddenly made sense in a way it hadn't before. That evening, I returned to the house and moved through my routine as usual. I cooked. I listened. I observed. Daniel was relaxed. Emily was quiet. His mother spoke freely, confident in her place. They didn't know anything had changed. But it had. I stopped measuring my days by their comfort. I stopped adjusting my presence to fit their convenience. Inside, I had crossed a line they couldn't see yet. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't waiting. I was moving with intention. And once you do that, the outcome stops being uncertain. It simply hasn't arrived yet. 2 weeks later, the balance shifted, quietly but decisively. Daniel didn't hear it from me first. That mattered. A formal notice arrived at the house on a Tuesday afternoon, sealed in an envelope that didn't invite debate. I stood in the hallway as he opened it, watching the color drain from his face line by line. He read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower, as if the words might change. He looked up at me, searching for something: anger, fear, panic. He found none. A meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. Witnesses would be present. The terms were clear. No theatrics. No surprises. Just facts, laid out in order the way they should have been from the beginning. That week felt different. Daniel spoke less. His mother's confidence dulled, her voice quieter at the table. Emily avoided me completely, moving through the house as if eye contact might force her to confront something she wasn't ready to face. Kept my routine. Calm unsettles people who rely on control. Friday arrived. We met in a neutral room with neutral walls. Nothing dramatic, nothing personal. Daniel came early. His mother sat close beside him, rigid, hands folded tightly in her lap. Emily took a seat between us, her eyes fixed on the floor. When it was my turn to speak, I did so evenly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't list my pain. I laid out dates, amounts, and acknowledgments. I explained my financial contribution to the home and the conditions under which I had moved in. I described the pressure to leave, the reassignment of space, the timeline, without embellishment. Facts carry weight when you let them stand on their own. Daniel interrupted once. He tried to reframe the situation to soften what was being revealed. The attorney asked him to stop. The room went still. For the first time since this began, Daniel wasn't steering the conversation. His mother shifted in her chair. She spoke about need, about family, about sacrifice. I listened. Then I returned to the record. Need doesn't erase agreement. Family doesn't excuse coercion. Emily finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The truth had already been said. The outcome wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No slammed doors. But control moved. Away from Daniel and toward clarity. Responsibilities were reassigned. Decisions were no longer unilateral. The assumption that I would simply disappear dissolved under documentation. When the meeting ended, Daniel stood quietly, stunned. His certainty had been built on one belief: that I would stay silent forever. He had been wrong. I didn't gloat. I didn't linger. I gathered my papers and left with the same composure I'd brought with me. Justice doesn't need an audience. It needs precision. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter, not because I had taken something from them, but because I had reclaimed my voice without ever raising it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded gradually, the way a structure settles after pressure is released. Quietly, inevitably. Daniel lost something that day, though it took time for him to understand what it was. It wasn't just control over the house. It was the authority he had assumed over my life. Decisions that once moved forward without question now required consent, documentation, and accountability. The arrangement changed. Not in my favor alone, but in fairness. Financial responsibilities were recalculated based on actual contributions, not assumptions or convenience. The expectation that I would quietly disappear was formally removed. The pressure to find another place dissolved, replaced by clear boundaries and timelines that protected me instead of pushing me out. Daniel's mother had to relocate. Not with anger. Not with spectacle. But decisively. The space she had taken without hesitation was no longer hers to claim. Her confidence faded quickly once it became clear that entitlement has limits when facts are involved. The house felt different afterward. Not warmer. Not kinder. Just honest. Emily withdrew for a while. I don't blame her. Confronting the truth about what you allowed is often harder than confronting someone who wronged you outright. She needed time to reconcile her loyalty with her conscience. I gave her that time. The rest of the family reacted in small, revealing ways. Conversations softened. Eye contact returned. People who had stayed silent before now avoided the topic entirely. The story they had accepted, that I was difficult, temporary, inconvenient, no longer held together. I didn't celebrate. I didn't press further. The power shift spoke for itself. A few weeks later I made a decision of my own. Not because I was forced to, but because I wanted peace on my terms. I found a quiet apartment not far away. Morning sunlight through the windows. Space that belonged only to me. I moved out without bitterness and without apology. Daniel didn't say much when I left. He stood in the doorway, unsure what words were left now that the narrative he'd relied on had collapsed. His silence was different this time. It wasn't control. It was understanding, late but real. I took my things and closed the door gently behind me. Justice didn't punish him loudly. Corrected him. And that correction followed him long after I was gone. I'm living quietly now. Not hidden, just settled. My apartment is small, but it's mine. Morning light reaches the kitchen table. My keys open one door and no one questions my right to walk through it. I've learned that peace isn't really about space. It's about certainty. Daniel and I don't speak anymore. There's nothing left that needs saying. He understands now what he lost. Not money, not control, but trust. That kind of loss doesn't announce itself. It shows up later when authority feels hollow and confidence no longer holds. Emily visits sometimes. We speak carefully, choosing our words. She carries guilt I never asked her to carry, and I don't punish her for it. Accountability and cruelty are not the same thing, and I wanted her to understand that. What happened to me didn't make me bitter. It clarified me. I learned that patience without boundaries invites erosion. That silence can be strength, but only when it's chosen, not imposed. And that justice doesn't always arrive with raised voices or dramatic endings. Sometimes it arrives in documents, in calm meetings, in a quiet refusal to be erased. At 55, I didn't discover power. I remembered it. Age didn't weaken me. Train me. It taught me when to observe, when to wait, and when to move with precision instead of force. I didn't need revenge. I needed alignment, between truth and consequence. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. Dignity doesn't require permission. Not from family. Not from marriage. Not from age. When someone chooses to push you aside to make room for their comfort, they are making a statement about what they value. And when you choose justice instead of silence, you make one too. Mine was simple. I would not disappear quietly. I would not beg for space I had already earned. And I would never confuse kindness with surrender again. That decision didn't make noise. But it changed everything. Looking back now, I understand that what hurt most wasn't being asked to leave a room. It was being treated as if my years, my sacrifices, and my presence could be rearranged without my consent. That kind of dismissal cuts deeper than anger because it tells you exactly where you stand in someone else's priorities. I used to believe that aging meant learning how to step back gracefully. I was wrong. Aging taught me when stepping back becomes erasing yourself, and when standing still is the braver choice. I didn't win because someone apologized. I didn't win because anyone suddenly understood my pain. I won because I chose not to abandon myself just to keep others comfortable. Justice for me wasn't about punishment. It was about correction. About restoring balance where entitlement had quietly taken over. There's a strength that comes with years lived attentively. You learn patterns. You learn timing. You learn that loud reactions often satisfy others more than they protect you. What truly unsettles people is calm certainty, especially when they assumed you had none. I no longer measure my worth by how useful I am to others. I measure it by how I treat myself when no one is watching. I wake up in a space that belongs to me. I make decisions without fear of being displaced. I speak when it matters and I stay silent when silence serves me, not them. If you're listening to this and you're older, quieter, or tired of being told to wait your turn, hear this clearly. Dignity is not a favor. It's a boundary. And boundaries don't need permission to exist. Family betrayal taught me a hard truth, but it also gave me something I didn't know I still had: authority over my own life. Not borrowed. Not negotiated. Claimed. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it arrives as peace. And sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do at any age is refuse to disappear. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these voices reach people who need them. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every message. Until the next story, remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strength.